Today's story is about an astonishing robbery in which a gang of thieves actually robbed a moving train. About $3,342,250 US, pound sterling live. After that, the entire gang went on the run, and it was just a farmer's tip that turned the whole story on its head. The planning that went into executing this theft was at such a high level that every single detail was taken care of, and that is exactly why it proved to be a perfect robbery. So how did they pull off this genius risky plan? And did the police ever reach these thieves? It will make you wonder that there is no limit to the human mind. The story begins in August 1963, when a train was running late at night from Glasgow to London. The train had just passed a village called Letburn, when, because of a red signal, the train suddenly stopped. As soon as the train stopped, the assistant driver got off the engine to check what the problem was. But he was unaware that some people were hiding in the nearby bushes. He was walking on the tracks when two masked men attacked him and separated the first two carriages from the train. After that, the engine and those two carriages were taken to a bridge where the gang's second team was already waiting so they could loot the two carriages. It was around 3, and most of the gang didn't even know what was inside this carriage, and they had no idea that what they were about to see was something they had never imagined in their lives. That night was going to be the biggest night of these thieves' lives, and they were about to carry out the biggest robbery in Britain's history. Now the biggest question is, how was this risky and genius plan conceived and how was it executed? For that, we need to go a little back to where it all began. In 1963, in the city of London, there was a man named Bruce Reynolds, who was known for his daring criminal activities and lavish lifestyle, and he received a tip that would change his life forever. Bruce saw himself as a high-class criminal inspired by Hollywood robbery movies, and for him theft was an art in which he considered himself an artist. He was heavily influenced by movies like Riffy and Asphalt Jungle, which show brilliantly planned robberies, and Bruce carried out different robberies inspired by those films. Before carrying out his last and biggest theft, he had developed a high-profile thief image. Then he built a network of skilled and cunning thieves capable of pulling off any robbery in the world. Bruce was part of a professional criminal gang called the Southwest, famous for its high-value robbery. This gang executed all their thefts with a lot of planning and precision, and they only killed people when they thought it was necessary. Otherwise, they did not harm anyone. In this Southwest gang, there were 5 most important members: Bruce Reynolds, Gordon Goody, Charlie, Wilson, Buster Edward, and Ray James. Each member had a special skill that ran the gang, and they all had the same goal: to live a carefree and luxurious life from the robbery money. The whole plan began one evening when Bruce and Goody were sitting together, and Goody gave him a tip that would become the biggest robbery of their lives. This tip came to Goody from a man named Ultiman, whose real identity was never revealed, and Ultiman told him that he knew about a shipment that was filled entirely with cash and whose security was very weak. Because this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Bruce immediately agreed to it as soon as he heard it. First, they decided to form a team and gave Goody the responsibility because he had connections everywhere. That's how he got the intelligence tip, and he was also very skilled at hiring the right people. Anyway, the tip Ultiman gave Goody was that a Royal Mail train would be going between Glasgow and London, and that 2 carriages of that train would contain a lot of cash because due to the public holiday, banks and businesses were closed and cash was being transferred from one city to another. And Ultiman already knew this. Ultiman also knew the train schedule, and that security was very low in the 2 carriages containing the cash. As soon as Goody received this tip, Bruce felt that this was the opportunity he had always been waiting for. Although Bruce's gang had previously looted some cargo containers, they had never before stopped a moving train, so they began to plan for this. As they began their planning, the first thing they needed was someone experienced, and then a connection of their gang's Buster Edward came forward, a friend of his and a member of the South Coast Raider gang. This gang was expert at train robberies and knew how to stop a train, making them perfect for this theft. He was a criminal who met Bruce in the 60s, and at that time Bruce was busy growing his network, from small-time thefts into something bigger. Anyway, Buster and Bruce both went together to meet this South Coaster gang, and the South Coast gang agreed to join them in this robbery. The gang included Tommy Wisby, Bob Wells, and Jamie Hassey, who were the most important members of this gang and ran the whole gang, and the entire gang was full of train robbers. They brought along another man who was an expert at hacking signals and who would later prove very useful in stopping the train. Now they needed someone who could drive a train, and Bruce knew a man by the name of Rooney Biggs, who was a retired train driver and was also known as Peter. Now their gang was completely ready, and they began to watch the train routes very closely, and the place they chose to carry out the robbery was Sears Crossing. It was an isolated spot, surrounded by fields, and here they would separate the carriages and take them to the bridge and loot them. The truck that would carry the stolen money was prepared by a separate team led by a man named Roy James. Roy James had previously been a racing driver who was passionate about cars, and that is why he started stealing cars, and whenever the police tried to catch him, he would get away. Altogether, he was a very skilled driver whom the whole gang needed so they could easily escape with the loot. Their plan was now almost fully ready, but they still needed a place to hide after the robbery and to divide the stolen goods among themselves. After a few days of searching, the gang's attention fell on a farmhouse called Leather State Farm. This farmhouse was about 50 kilometers from the bridge where the robbery would take place, and because it was completely deserted, it was a perfect place for their gang. The farmhouse had been lying empty among the fields for many years, so they could all hide here easily, and the police would not be able to reach them easily. The man who arranged this farmhouse was named Brian Field, and he was the fixer who arranged everything different criminal groups needed. Brian was brought in by Godon Goody to arrange everything required for the whole operation, and he had taken the farmhouse on rent using fake documents. By now their gang was fully ready. They had picked their target. The place to stop the train had been decided. The trucks to carry the money were ready, and the farmhouse to hide in had been arranged. Bruce believed that by carrying out a perfect robbery he would make history. But he was unaware that what would happen to him next he had never even dreamed of. Anyway, when the gang was fully ready, there were a total of 15 people in it, and the leader of the whole gang was Bruce Reynolds, of whom 12 were from the Southwest gang, and 3 were from the South Coast Raider gang. Finally, the day came when they had to carry out the robbery, and on the night of 8 August 1963, the whole gang loaded their weapons into a truck and set off for Bridego Bridge, where the robbery would take place. Some members of the gang went on foot towards Sears Crossing, where they had to stop the train, and meanwhile Bruce, along with 2 others, cut all the phone lines in the area so that no one could call for help. At about 3, Bruce and Godon Roger got into the truck and began to run alongside the moving train, and then Roger jumped and grabbed the carriage of the train. Elsewhere, a gang member opened the signal box and began to tamper with it, and because the train stopped at the red signal and moved on green, the gang member covered the green signal with gloves and connected a battery to keep the red signal on. Now they all waited for the train to come near the signal, and then they saw the train approaching Sears Crossing. But as soon as the driver saw the red signal, he stopped the train, and exactly what they wanted happened. As soon as the train stopped, the assistant driver got off and walked toward the phone to call the lineman because the train was not supposed to stop here, and then he discovered that all the phone lines had been cut. Anyway, putting down the phone, he started to walk back toward the train when a gang member hit him and knocked him down, and the rest of the gang members boarded the train. Gang member James Hassey went straight into the engine and began to assault the driver, beating him unconscious. Meanwhile, 2 gang members separated the 2 carriages attached to the engine from the rest of the train, and then the retired train driver climbed into the engine so he could drive it, because he had been retired for a long time and by now new diesel engines had come with completely different controls and he could not operate this engine. In any case, under duress they revived the driver they had knocked unconscious and threatened him, telling him to take the train to the bridge or they would kill him. Now to the other carriage attached to this engine, in which parcels full of cash were kept. 5 workers were busy sorting the rest of the money orders separately so they could get them cash. Although they realized that the train had stopped at a place where it should not have stopped, it did not occur to them that thieves had taken over the train. In any case, after a while the train reached Bridego Bridge, where the rest of the gang members were already waiting, and the train was stopped on this bridge. As soon as the train stopped, some gang members broke the windows of the second carriage and entered it, taking the 5 workers hostage. Once these workers were taken captive, all the alarms were deactivated, and then one by one the parcels full of cash were loaded into the truck. Within just 20 minutes the gang had loaded 120 parcels into the truck, and the total weight of this cash was. However, the gang left some parcels in the carriage because they felt that if they stayed any longer they might be caught, and they had to leave before anyone found out. Before leaving, James Hassey told the driver and the other workers to lie on the ground for the next half hour, and this instruction later played a very important role in the investigation. About 45 minutes after the robbery was carried out, the gang reached Leather State Farm and began unloading the cash parcels there. After taking out all the money, when Douglas and Charles counted it, they were stunned because the amount was $3,339,000, and this was far more than they had expected. Seeing this, they rejoiced and began to celebrate, drinking alcohol and smoking cigarettes as well. But one thing kept worrying the men again and again, were the police on their trail. A high-profile robbery had become the biggest robbery in Britain's history, and after counting all the cash, the gang divided it equally among themselves, $3,339,750. They divided it into shares so that everyone's share came to $201,000, and the remaining small helpers were given between $26,800 to $536. Meanwhile, Bruce turned the radio on and their whole celebration turned into tension, because the radio announced that the police had launched a search operation that would comb everywhere within a 50-kilometer. Now they began to understand that they would not be able to hide at the farmhouse for long, and so they decided to leave the farmhouse the next day. Brian Field had already arranged some safe houses where some gang members went, and the other gang members went to different places. Brian had also arranged a man who would come to the farmhouse after they left and erase all the evidence such as fingerprints and anything that could tie them to the place. Because of this robbery, the Royal Mail and the British government suffered a great deal of disgrace and embarrassment, and that is why the pressure to catch the thieves was enormous and kept mounting day by day. The police were given full freedom and all resources so that they could catch the thieves as soon as possible. But the reason the thieves were caught turned out to be very small and trivial, which ruined all their plans. The workers inside the carriage told the police that one of the thieves had told them to lie down for 30 minutes, and another worker had seen a gang member running away in a Land Rover. Now the police had two small leads, on the basis of which they began their search, and at the same time a reward of $13,400 was announced for information about the case. 5 days after the search began, the police received a tip from a farmer named John Maris, and this farmer lived near the farmhouse where the gang had been staying. The farmer told the police that the farmhouse had been empty for several years, and that for the past few days he had seen some people going in and out of it. When he became suspicious, he went near the farmhouse and saw 2 Land Rovers parked there, which he reported to the police. On receiving this information, the police raided Leather State Farm on 13 August. But when the police reached inside the farmhouse, there was no one there. However, they found some evidence. Parcels from which cash had been removed lay scattered around the farm. Packaging material, some notes and a few things were strewn here and there. All this evidence fell into the hands of the police because of Brian's mistake. Instead of erasing the evidence himself, he had given the job to someone else and told him to destroy and burn all the evidence from the farmhouse. But seeing the police intensify their search, the man got scared and fled without doing the job, because he had already taken money from Brian for the work. Thus the entire gang believed that the farmhouse had been burned down and that no one would check it again, and this proved to be their biggest mistake. The farmhouse that they thought would be reduced to ashes became the biggest piece of evidence, and from here the police got the first lead that would solve the case. One more mistake occurred during the robbery. Bruce had ordered all the gang members to wear gloves while they were at the farmhouse. Although some gang members kept their gloves on, some took them off because they thought the farmhouse would be burned and all evidence destroyed, and for that reason, along with other evidence, the police also found fingerprints, which were in themselves very strong evidence. Although it took the police quite a long time to match these fingerprints with their records, about a month later 2 gang members were caught. These 2 gang members were Roger Goody and William Board, who had rented a flat in Mann, California. Their landlord became suspicious when they paid 3 months' rent in advance, using a 10-shilling note. A 10-shilling note used to be a common British note, whose value before 1971 was half a pound, 67 US cents, and it was used for day-to-day transactions. Anyway, seeing a British 10-shilling note in America, the landlord grew suspicious and reported it to the police. When the police matched that 10-shilling note with the serial numbers of the stolen notes, they matched, and these 2 gang members were arrested. A short time after this arrest, the fingerprints led to the identification of 8 more gang members: Rooney Biggs, Charlie Wilson, Buster Edwards, Bob Wells, Jamie Hassey, Tommy Wisby and Roy James. One by one all the gang members were caught, and the mastermind Bruce Reynolds was arrested last in 1968 because he had fled to Mexico with his family and then returned to England via Canada and France, changing his identity and living under a different name. But finally he was recognized and arrested. Only 5 members of this gang were never caught. First was Altaman, who had given the gang the tip about the cash shipment. His identity remains unknown to this day. The other 4 members, 3 of whom had been included only to lend a hand, and the 4th being the retired train driver, were also never caught. At trial all the gang members pleaded not guilty, while Roger Goody confessed to his crime. The gang members received sentences ranging from 3 to 30 years, and the robbery became Britain's biggest and most sensational news story. Rooney Biggs and Buster Edward became celebrities. Some members of the gang wrote their own autobiographies. Rooney Biggs wrote Out Man Out the Last Rob, and Buster Edward wrote an autobiography called The Truth About Train Robbery. Only $536,000 of the stolen money was ever recovered. The rest was either spent, hidden, or laundered and sent elsewhere, and it was never found again. Tell me in the comments how you like this story. Like and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.